don't disrupt the room for that. If someone offers you a first-round pick for him, then I think you have to do it.
You're listening to the PuckUps Podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian D. Felice.
Welcome into episode 14 of the PuckUps Podcast. I am Brian D. Felice, and thank you all for joining me. On today's show, we're going to talk about the Bruins' big win over the Columbus Blue Jackets in their first game back from the Olympic break. And with the trade deadline right around the corner, is Don Sweeney shopping already? And if so, who are some players of interest that have been linked to the Bruins so far? And what could that mean for the future of a player like Matt Poitras, who may or may not be a centerpiece trade chip? So we'll talk about all of that and preview the Bruins game on Saturday against the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, before we discuss Bruins Blue Jackets, because it's been nearly a month, let's take a step back to remind ourselves on where the Bruins stand league-wide in some key metrics. So following their win against Columbus, the Bruins are 33-20-5. They have 71 points and a .612 points percentage. They're 10th overall in the NHL standings, 5th in the Atlantic. They're wild card 2 in the East. They're 7th in the league in goals for per game at 3.4. They're 15th in the league in goals against per game at 3.12. They're 10th overall in goal differential at plus 15. They have the third best power play at 26.5% and the 27th ranked penalty kill at 76.5%. Now let's start there because in my opinion, the PK is the biggest need for improvement for the Bruins in the final 24 games of the season now. They have been one of, if not the most undisciplined teams all year long. And when you are taking more penalties than just about anybody else, and you have the 27th worst penalty kill percentage, it's a recipe for disaster. So if the Bruins plan on being a playoff team at the conclusion of game 82, they have to rectify the PK. And it starts with staying out of the box. But whether you're the most disciplined team or undisciplined team, you're still going to take your fair share of penalties because it's just the way that the game is. So when you do take penalties, the Bruins need to make sure that they're winning their fair share of D-zone draws, especially at the start of power plays for oppositions, okay? Because when you lose a draw to start a PK, you're defending right from the start. If you can win that draw and ice it, you've just taken off 30 seconds off the clock. And now the opposing power play, they have to go back, regroup, gain entry, set up. And, sometimes power plays can't recover from an initial icing. So that's huge for Boston. When they do have the puck, they have to make sure it gets out. Your goalie has to be your best penalty killer. And also, you have to be aggressive when the opportunity presents. When a penalty kill is too passive and you just allow the power play to win races to loose pucks and you bottle up too much of the middle. Yeah, you keep them to the outside, but sometimes you just aren't aggressive enough. And there's a phrase, assholes and elbows. And the reason that phrase exists is because if you see a guy who's on the power play and, you see his backside, you have to attack him because, he's vulnerable. He's going for a loose puck or whatnot, or he's turning. And if you see the backside of a power play player as a PK guy, you have to be aggressive in that moment and try to pressure him. So that to me is going to be the biggest need for improvement for the Bruins in the final 24 games of the season. As for Columbus, I saw this game on the schedule and thought to myself, if I'm Boston, this is the perfect game to come back to from break. And why is that? It's because Columbus is 4 points, or was 4 points behind Boston for the final playoff spot in the East. Now, on the one hand, it's a dangerous matchup because if you lose that game in regulation, now Columbus has closed that gap to 2 points. That said, seeing that game on the schedule allows the Bruins to mentally understand that, hey, you know what? We may have been off for 3.5 weeks, but this is a sprint to the end of the regular season, and every game matters. I think when you take off a month for the Olympics, I think naturally players may come back like they were on summer break and they're coming back to school, and the urgency and the flow and the speed and the skill and the execution, it may not be where it is or where it was right away when you get back, and you kind of need it to be because the games matter so much. And so, for the Bruins, I think it was good mentally for them to come back against an opponent that's right behind them in the standings and that had been playing some of the best hockey in the NHL along with the Bruins prior to the Olympic break. Now, I do think that the Olympic break happening was good for Boston in terms of catching Columbus at a good time because Columbus was steamrolling teams prior to the break. And so you kind of get them afterwards. Now, I thought the Blue Jackets came out really hard on Boston. There were two teams out there. And in the first period, it looked like one team hadn't played in a month in Boston. And it looked like another team picked up right where they left off in Columbus. And they put up 20 shots early in the first period. And, they got won by Korpisalo on a breakaway. It wasn't Korpisalo's fault. He stood on his head. And, Columbus could have had a 2-3 goal lead after the first period if it wasn't for Jonas Korpisalo's strong play. Kirill Marchenko got that breakaway goal for the Blue Jackets, and it was matched by Victor Arvidsson, who got his 15th goal of the year late in the first period on a shot from the sideboards that kind of just found a way in off of some skates in front of the net. So the Bruins got outplayed in the first period, but they get away with a 1-1 tie. And in the second period, to the Bruins' credit, they're able to get a couple of goals, one on the power play by Morgan Geekie, who got his 33rd goal of the year, ties a career high in goals, which he had last year. So safe to say with 24 games to go, Morgan Geekie is going to exceed last year's totals and set a new career high in goals. But he had a nice one-timer goal on the power play on a feed from David Pastrnak, who gets his 50th assist of the year. And Boston's up 2-1. Sean Kuraly would get a nice insurance goal for the Bruins to give him a 3-1 lead late in the second period on a slap shot from the top of the circle. And he did a patented Kuraly leap into the glass. Big goal for the Bruins. Adam Fantilli would make it 3-2 in the third. And then Victor Arvidsson would get his 16th goal of the year on an empty net to give Boston a 4-2 lead and eventually the game. So it wasn't the prettiest of games for the Bruins, but it was a big win for them for the reasons I mentioned earlier, where you are able to be the team to get not just a win against Columbus, but a regulation win. And that's a 4-point swing. So now you're 6 up on the Blue Jackets, and you've put them down a little bit more. Now, Columbus is probably more likely to make the playoffs through their own division at this point than the wild card, I would say. But it's a big win for the Bruins, and not only do they remain in the wild card 2 spot, but they're only 3 points back of third place in their own division, or 2 points back rather. So right now in the Atlantic, it's Tampa Bay, Detroit, and Montreal. And Montreal has 73 points. So if you're the Bruins, right now you're in wild card 2. But as I said earlier, they're also 10th in the entire NHL standing. So the Atlantic has 5 of the top 10 teams in the NHL. And so if you're the Bruins, you're trying to eye that divisional spot. which would put them against Detroit in the playoffs. So I think you'd rather play Detroit than either Tampa Bay or Carolina in the first round. So the Eastern Conference playoff structure is still very much figuring itself out. But I mentioned Morgan Geekie earlier, and he was asked after the game about the contrast between locker room energy from this time last year to this time this year, where last year the Bruins were entering the trade deadline and it was known that they were going to be selling. And of course, we know they traded Charlie Coyle, who made his return to the Garden last night for the first time as an opposition, got a nice tribute and ovation from the crowd. Great pro, Charlie Coyle. I mean, he was a fantastic trade to Boston from Minnesota back in 2019. And he's having a good year for Columbus. But yeah, Geekie he was asked about it. And last year, the locker room was dejected. And you saw all your friends leave and get traded away. This year, the Bruins are playing well. And it looks like management is going to try to help the team on paper rather than subtract. So Morgan Geekie was asked about that.
Morgan, I remember you talking last year about the energy around this time of year a year ago, right? Guys are getting shipped out. You kind of felt it. What's the energy like this time around?
It kind of feels polar opposite, to be honest. I think this group's done a great job of kind of putting ourselves in the position to, kind of stand pat or add guys, whatever they see fit. But, I think we've put in a good enough season so far that we're able to it's a results-driven business, and I think for us it's just kind of a testament to what we've done all year and just to continue to build. So you can kind of feel it every game. We know we give ourselves a chance to win, regardless of who we're playing. So it's a lot more fun for sure.
So here's a perfect example of a player that I'm really curious to see what Don Sweeney does with. Morgan Geekie mentioned in that audio clip that maybe Sweeney will stand pat or add, right? The perfect case study for me is Victor Arvidsson. What do you do with Victor Arvidsson, right? I mean, you traded for him right before the opening of free agency this past summer. And he's in his early 30s, has had a couple of down years prior to this season where he's battled injuries and inconsistency. And the Bruins traded for him in the final year of his contract coming over from Edmonton. And the biggest question was why? Like, what hole did Victor Arvidsson fill in that moment when the Bruins needed, youth and speed and skill, which isn't easy to come by necessarily in free agency because with the cap going up constantly, players are re-signing with their own organizations. But, best case scenario is what I heard from people at the time was, well, you know what? Maybe he comes in next year and, has a resurrection season and can improve his trade value and the Bruins can flip him at the deadline for a draft pick. Well, Victor Arvidsson has played better than even those people hoped he would play. I mean, he's got 30 points in 46 games this year for the Bruins, 16 goals. And now a lot of those same people don't want the Bruins to trade him. I mean, I understand. Like, if you trade Arvidsson right now, then, you're going to upset the locker room. Now, granted, the Bruins are probably going to buy and sell at this year's deadline. So if they trade Arvidsson, I don't think it would just be a situation where they're just getting rid of Arvidsson and that's it. Like, if that were the case, then yeah, I think you'd have some upset Bruins in the room and an upset head coach in Marco Sturm, who really likes Victor Arvidsson and has a history with them dating back to their time in LA. But I just think, if you get offered a first-round pick for Victor Arvidsson, who is on an expiring contract, is in his early 30s, early mid-30s. He's had inconsistencies with production despite a really good year this year. He's had injury issues. You kind of feel like this might be the best of Arvidsson right now. So to me, Arvidsson's an interesting case study. You have a team in the Bruins who are projecting to make the playoffs, and Arvidsson's been one of their better 5-on-5 players, producing on their second line. Do you get rid of that guy? Or like, do you get rid of him for long-term asset management? Or do you keep him for a short-term playoff run where you're probably not going to make the Stanley Cup Finals anyway, let alone win them? So when Morgan Geekie talks about Sweeney standing pat or maybe adding to the team, when you hear your players expecting your GM to not be selling pieces off, if you're Sweeney, like, it must be tough to do that. Like, it's got to be tough to sell some important pieces to the current group when they're expecting you to do the opposite. Now, as I said, I do think there might be a bit of both, and we'll get to those options in a second. But I think the jury is out on Victor Arvidsson. I honestly don't know what's going to happen with him and the Bruins at this trade deadline. I really don't, because I think the Bruins are trying to add some players that are younger and more in their prime at this deadline if they can, and they may have to try to make some cap work. And if the Bruins intend on bringing in some impact players, they only have like $3 million in cap space, so something's got to give. So I think that if someone's offering you a second-round draft pick for Arvidsson, I'm not sure. I'm kind of on the fence. I'm probably leaning towards don't disrupt the room for that. If someone offers you a first-round pick for him, then I think you have to do it. If someone offers you a second-round pick for him or a third-round pick for him, and moving Arvidsson's salary is part of a domino effect to bring in somebody bigger, then I think you have to do that. You have to do that too. I just think that this deadline is one of those situations where you may have to upset some people to do what's best. And I'm not making any predictions on if Arvidsson is going to be traded or not. I'm just saying I'm interested. I'm interested because I can see why they keep him for this current group, for this playoff run this spring. But if the Bruins don't intend on re-signing him this summer, and moving Arvidsson helps facilitate a different deal, or help recuperate a draft pick that you maybe plan on trading away for somebody else right now, I just think that it's layered. And I think Arvidsson's been great for the Bruins. I like him. I like him on the ice. I like him off the ice. But in this cutthroat business that can be professional sports, I'm interested. So we'll follow that. And the reason why Arvidsson could be on the way out, potentially, because you're trying to capitalize on an expiring asset. But also, as I said, perhaps they're trying to, get rid of his salary to make room for something else. Now, what could something else mean? Well, I'm glad you asked, because there's been a couple of articles, right? There's David Pagnotta from the Fourth Period, and there's Anthony DeMarco from Daily Faceoff. Now, here are some names in print that the Bruins have been said to be interested in. Now, before I read off these names, because a lot of them are St. Louis Blues and a lot of them are Calgary Flames. And the reason why that matters is because Don Sweeney and Doug Armstrong, the GM of the St. Louis Blues, they have a history, including their duties for Hockey Canada, where they just spent some time together in Milano Cortina at the Olympics. And I just think that there's been some discussions with those two about Hockey Canada, and as reported a few weeks back, about more than Hockey Canada. And then the other team that the Bruins have been linked to are the Calgary Flames. And the Calgary Flames, we know, Don Sweeney was talking to heavily trying to pursue Rasmus Andersson, and was a Rasmus Andersson commitment to an extension away from making a deal with Calgary and Craig Conroy. So those two teams are teams that the Bruins have been talking to and have relations with. And so I do think that it's not a coincidence that we're hearing some players on those rosters that the Bruins are interested in. So before we get to those players, here's Elliot Friedman on the latest 32 Thoughts talking about the Bruins trade deadline approach.
I think Boston, we know they tried Rasmus Andersson, so I could still see them being on the D market. I've heard they want to add a forward if they can. Don Sweeney did an interview with their Nesson during the games where he says we could work both sides of this.
So I mentioned earlier David Pagnotta of the Fourth Period's article. And in that article, he stated that the Bruins were interested in acquiring a right shot defenseman and a top six forward. Now, the right shot defenseman we're not surprised by because, as Elliot just said in that sound clip, and as I said a minute ago, the Bruins were razor thin close to acquiring Rasmus Andersson, who is a right shot defenseman. The top six forward part, to me, yeah, I think, we all know the Bruins would like to add that player, but we want that player to be somebody who's, in their prime or, approaching their prime. And is that player out there? What teams are giving up on those types of guys, especially top six forwards, right? It's easy to say we need a top six forward. It's harder to go out and get one. So especially with how free agency works these days, as I said earlier, where the salary cap continues to go up. And so players just re-sign with their current teams. Now, let's talk about right shot defense for a second. And the names that have been linked to the Bruins there. Again, these names have been in print by David Pagnotta and Anthony DeMarco. St. Louis Blues, Justin Falk. Okay. Justin Falk is 33 years old, cap hit of $6.5 million, UFA in 2027. Okay. Justin Falk, to me, is a good defenseman, a good two-way defenseman, a good solid veteran. There's rumors out there that Doug Armstrong is going to be looking for a Rasmus Andersson type return. Now, that's a bit steep, I think, for Falk, who is 33 years old and set to be a UFA next summer. And the price for Rasmus Andersson included a first-round pick. So if you're the Bruins, I don't think you're entertaining that at all for Justin Falk. Rasmus Ristolainen is another name that came up from the Philadelphia Flyers. Again, 31 years old, $5.1 million cap hit, UFA in 2027. Totally different player than Justin Falk, but he's more of that bigger-bodied, physical, rugged, top four defensive defenseman. So again, I like Rasmus Ristolainen, but it comes down to cost for me. And I don't think his cap hit's bad, but I don't want to give up a first-round pick for him. So if that's what it takes, no. Now, here's a couple of right shot defensemen that I would definitely entertain parting at least one first-round pick for, but not one of Boston's betters. Maybe Boston's second first-round pick in 27 or something like that. Mackenzie Weegar. Now, Weegar was mentioned in print having interest by the Bruins. Weegar is 32 years old, $6.25 million cap hit. He's in year 3 of an 8-year deal. He's a UFA in 2031. Weegar, to me, is a legit top four defenseman. Yes, he's up there in age a little bit. He's still in his prime, but on the latter back half of it. But again, to me, I just think it comes down to cost. I'm not giving up the farm for him. But I think for the right deal, I think Weegar is somebody that would make the Bruins better right now and for the intermediate future. And the term intermediate future, I'll get to in a second what I mean by that and why I'm using that verbiage. And for the same reason, this player has not been linked to the Bruins a ton via print, but it's kind of under the radar as to who I think the Bruins could be talking to Doug Armstrong about for St. Louis, and that's Colton Parayko. Colton Parayko is 32 years old. If you saw the Olympics, he's on the Olympic blue line for the Canadiens. $6.5 million cap hit in year 4 of 8 on his current deal. He's a UFA in 2030. Bruins fans know Colton Parayko pretty well. He was a pretty instrumental part of St. Louis's blue line in 2019 when they won the Stanley Cup Finals. And again, for me, I think that he's young enough where you could add him to your blue line. He's your second pair right shot defenseman behind McAvoy for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And I think you're not really regretting that. Now, here's what I think is Don Sweeney's plan at right shot defense. We all know that right now, organizationally, the Bruins literally don't have any right shot defensive prospects. I mean, you have Charlie McAvoy and then Andrew Peeke and Henry Jokiharju. And then beyond them, I think it's Billy Sweezy, who is, not he's not it. So now Andrew Peeke is an interesting guy too, because he could be on the move as well. There's been speculation that the Bruins could be willing to part with Andrew Peeke as well at this trade deadline. But I think the plan for Don Sweeney right now is I think he's trying to identify a legit second pair right shot defenseman, even if they are in their early 30s. Because I think what his plan is to try to find a stopgap right shot defenseman to play alongside his current core in McAvoy, Pastrnak, etc., while they draft and develop their future top 4 right shot defensemen, probably with one of their first round picks in 2026. So I'll elaborate for a second, right? Hypothetically, if the Bruins traded for Mackenzie Weegar, for example, okay, you bring him in, he's 32 years old. He's a legit top 4 right shot defenseman for the next 3, 4, 5 seasons. Call it 3, 4 seasons, right? So you have him during the prime of McAvoy and Pastrnak and some other of Boston's core players. And by the time he's 35, 36, where you might start to think, okay, not really sure we want him to be that guy anymore. Hopefully, whatever right-handed shot defenseman they pick in the next first round that they draft in, hopefully by then they're ready to step into the lineup. That's where I think the Bruins are going, because as I mentioned earlier, free agency is just not the place to bring in top 4 right shot defensemen anymore. They're just going to re-sign if they become available. And so you have to draft one. And right now the Bruins can't draft one until June. And so I think they're going to, and even if they do draft one in June, which I think they're going to, I still think he's at least a year or 2 away. So I think the Bruins are looking at the trade market right now to try to find a legit top 4 right shot defenseman to be part of their current core. And by the time they start to get older, then insert, future prospect that they're going to draft this summer there. In a perfect world. That's what I think Don's doing. As far as up front, here are some other names that are being linked to the Bruins according to David Pagnotta and Anthony DeMarco. St. Louis Blues captain Brayden Schenn. Schenn is 34 years old. He's in year 6 of an 8-year contract at a $6.5 million cap hit. He's a UFA in 2028. Okay. Brayden Schenn. He's got 24 points in 58 games this year. He's a far cry from the player that he once was, in particular, when he won a cup with St. Louis back in 2019. So, again, if you're the Bruins, you shouldn't be giving up anything significant for this guy. I mean, If they want a first round pick for him, absolutely not. I'm not doing that at all for the Bruins. Another guy, Connor Garland, 25 points in 47 games for the Vancouver Canucks. He's 29, pretty good cap hit at $4.9 million. But he's a UFA at the end of the season. So the Bruins could try to trade for him, but I think you could probably maybe take a run at him in the offseason, because even though I mentioned that a lot of players are re-signing with their current teams with the cap going up, I don't think anybody's itching to re-sign in Vancouver right now. So I think the Bruins could probably, if they really wanted to take a swing at Connor Garland, take a swing at him in free agency. I don't think you should waste any assets on a guy who is going to be a UFA in 4 months and probably not re-signing where he currently is. Jake DeBrusk is a guy that's been linked to the Bruins. Well, I shouldn't say that. There was one article that was floating out the idea of the Bruins possibly being interested in DeBrusk, but from all accounts I've talked to, that may have been coming out of the Vancouver camp, not the Boston camp. And Seattle was rumored to have interest in DeBrusk, and same with Detroit. I don't think the Bruins are actually interested in DeBrusk. I just think it's not true. And I don't think the player is interested in Boston. I think it's been there, done that. Both sides know who they are. And I think the Bruins should be going forward, not backwards. I think DeBrusk is a guy who has a ton of speed and skill and a ton of potential that's just never going to be reached anymore. I'm not trying to be too harsh on him, but he's in year 2 of a 7-year contract with Vancouver, who's among the worst teams in the league right now, and they're going to be an absolute lottery team, and they're already done with them, trying to shop them. So I think the Bruins don't want to go near that with a 10-foot pole. Brock Besser is an interesting one, because Besser is somebody who the Bruins were very interested in heading into free agency this past summer, but he re-signed in Vancouver. And I was surprised by that, because everybody kind of saw the writing on the wall with Vancouver heading into this year. There weren't many expectations for them. So I was surprised to see Besser re-sign for 7 years with the Canucks after what happened with Miller and Elias Pettersson and all that drama. And you could tell Quinn Hughes didn't want to be there, and now he's not. He's in Minnesota. So Brock Besser is an interesting character. I think that, for the right price, you'd entertain it, but I don't know. He's at a cap hit of $7.25 million, and he's got 26 points in 51 games. So, all of these guys I've just mentioned, outside of Parayko or Weegar, I either don't like their age or I don't like their current production pace. So I'm not really chopping at the bit for any of these players, to be honest with you. I think even Weegar and Parayko, I'm afraid of what the asking price would be there. So it's the Bruins are in a tough spot here, because I feel like they're going to want to improve their roster, but I don't think they should be overpaying for anything. Like, they're kind of in the driver's seat right now. So you're in a playoff spot with your current roster. I think they make the playoffs with their current roster too. So I don't think the Bruins need to go crazy here. If you can get a guy with some term, or a guy who makes sense, like I think Parayko or Weegar makes sense if you need somebody to plug into your top 4 defense for the next 3 or 4 seasons. Again, until one of your future draft prospects develops. A forward name I am interested in here that was mentioned could be Jordan Kyrou. Now, Kairou's 27, $8 million cap hit, okay? But he's the type of guy that he's young enough, he's in his prime, and he's a legit top 6 forward. That's a guy that, if you're the Bruins, I think you have to strongly consider if the asking price is, say Matt Patra and Boston's second first-round pick in 2027. I think that's the type of deal where you have to give to get. If you're into Kyrou, I'm not saying that they should do it, but would I trade Patra and one of Boston's 5 first-round picks in the next 3 years for Kyrou? Yeah, I would. Now, speaking of Matt Patra, his name has been floated out there in print that Boston would be willing to move on from him. Now, it's not surprising to me at all. I think that if you've been paying attention to Patra's trajectory in Boston, it's been pretty downhill since he originally made the team in the fall of 2023. He's battled some injuries. He's battled some inconsistencies. He's been down in the minors for quite a bit. And I just think that he's a good player. But I think there's a bit of a logjam right now for the Bruins. I think you have Elias Lindholm under contract. You have Pavel Zacha under contract. Fraser Minton has solidified himself as a centerman for Boston going forward. So you have to battle those three guys for minutes up the middle. And he's not winning a center ice job against any of those guys right now. And furthermore, Patra has proven that he's not really a guy that can shift over to wing. So when you consider that right now he can't even win a job in Boston, let alone when James Higgins comes into the fold or potentially Dean Letourneau in the future, and you know that Patra's on a fourth line center, I just don't see it. I haven't seen it for quite some time with Patra. I think it's a matter of there's a lack of fit rather than a lack of talent or potential. And so I think Matt Patra could be a guy who's potentially on the way out. The Bruins don't have to do anything that they don't want to do, but it feels like Don Sweeney's trying to make something happen right now. And in a big way. I feel like Sweeney's trying to identify somebody that, could be a part of Boston's long-term future. And, a guy like Jordan Kyrou could be that. A guy like Robert Thomas could be that. Robert Thomas is a guy that has also been rumored to possibly be on the move at some point. And again, he was mentioned in the article by Anthony DeMarco for Daily Faceoff that the Bruins could be possibly talking to Doug Armstrong about Robert Thomas. So Robert Thomas is a guy that if you can acquire him without giving up James Higgins, then it's a massive win for the Bruins. I don't think the Bruins should be giving up James Higgins. I've felt that way for quite some time. I want to see what he is for Boston. But anything short of James Higgins, I'd give up Patra. I'd give up Letourneau. I'd give up another first or two for Robert Thomas. I think he's that good. And he's also 26 years old. So we'll see what happens. I mean, we'll see what happens with the Bruins. I can say this. I think there's going to be some fireworks. That's not an informed opinion. That's just my gut opinion. And I think the Bruins and Don Sweeney are going to make some things happen. I think the Eastern Conference is wide open this year. Yeah, Tampa Bay and Carolina, they're a step above the rest. But I just think right now the Bruins are going to try to make an impact. I think they're going to make an impact. They have 5 first-round picks over the next 3 years and 3 second-rounders. And then you have prospects like Dean Letourneau, Matt Patra, Fabian Lysell. Again, I hope that James Higgins is untouchable, but Dean Letourneau's name and Matt Patra's name were mentioned in Anthony DeMarco's Daily Faceoff article as players that Boston could be willing to part with. And with Letourneau's emergence in the NCAA this season, being over a point per game guy for BC, I want to see Letourneau in Boston too. But again, not all these prospects are going to, play in Boston at the same time. I just, something's got to give sometimes, and we'll see what happens. But I don't want to speculate too much because we do have a couple of weeks or nearly before the trade deadline comes and goes. But those are some initial names that we've seen out there linked to the Bruins. And again, for the most part, I'm not really too excited about any of these names. A couple of them I think are worthwhile. Mackenzie Weegar, Colton Parayko. Parayko's not really been out there in print, but because the Bruins are talking to St. Louis, maybe they're talking about Parayko. Another name that was mentioned was Nazem Kadri in Calgary. So again, I think Kadri's he's a good player, but he's not somebody I'm that interested in if I'm the Bruins. I think again, Kairu's young enough, Robert Thomas is young enough up front, and then on the back end, I'm okay with them going a little bit older in a Parayko or a Uyghur if the price is right, because they don't have any right-handed shot defensive prospects, and I think those guys could be a stopgap until any future right-handed shot defenseman is drafted and developed. So things to keep an eye on for sure going forward. If I had to guess, I feel like at least one of Patra or Mason Lohrei are traded at the deadline. I really do. I think Mason Lohrei would be gone right now if Rasmus Andersson committed to an extension in Boston. That's a fact. The only reason that Mason Lohrei is a Bruin right now is because Rasmus Andersson did not commit to an extension. If he did, Lohrei would be a Flame. So if Don Sweeney is calling Craig Conroy about Mackenzie Weegar, chances are Conroy knows that, maybe it starts with Lohrei again. So I could see Lohrei being on the move. I could see Patra being on the move. I wouldn't be surprised if, again, Victor Arvidsson is on the move as part of a facilitation for a different trade to create cap space. Maybe Henry Jokiharju is a guy that the Bruins look to move. My point is the Bruins are going to try to probably move somebody or somebody's currently taking up NHL cap space, because you're seeing them linked to these names, and when there's smoke, there's fire. I look at the state of the Calgary Flames and the St. Louis Blues and the Vancouver Canucks, and these are teams that aren't winning right now. They're not in win now mode. They're in sell mode. And I think that Don Sweeney has good relationships with these GMs, and I just think that there's going to be a match here. I can't help but feel that way. I don't think they're going to stand pat. I don't. I do think, and I felt for some time, that the Bruins trade deadline this year is going to be a combination of buying and selling. And I think some of the selling may be to help them buy, right? Free up cap space or maneuver roster positions or whatever. So we'll keep an eye on all of that and see how it plays out. The last thing I wanted to touch on is the Bruins are playing the Flyers Saturday at 3 p.m. in Philly. And the only notable thing about this game, because Philadelphia has kind of fallen back in the standings, they played the Bruins about a month and a half ago when it was similar to the Columbus game just now. Philadelphia entered Boston like 5 or 6 points back of the Bruins with a chance to close that gap for the final playoff spot. And the Bruins won in regulation, had a 4-point swing, and bumped the Flyers down the standings. And I don't think Philly has really recovered since then. The biggest storyline for me in this game upcoming is there any sort of act of revenge for Nicolas Deslauriers concussing Pavel Zacha and making Zacha miss the Stadium Series game and the Olympics? Now, the hit that concussed Zacha when these two teams played about a month ago, it wasn't a cheap shot. It was just a hard hit, and Deslauriers is a big boy, and I'm curious if Tanner Jeannot goes out there to try to avenge Zacha. And Deslauriers is probably a top 3 or 4 fighter in the NHL. I think Matthew Olivier is the current heavyweight champion. And then from there, I think it's a combination of Ryan Reeves, Arbor Jacki, Tanner Jeannot. Who else? Ross Johnson in Anaheim. Maybe Curtis McDermott. I think that it's not a fight that Jeannot is probably looking forward to, but I wouldn't be surprised to see those two drop the gloves and kind of spark a nice big bad Bruins, Broad Street Bullies midday matinee action in the city of brotherly love. So should be a good game. The Bruins have had a lot of success in Philadelphia the last handful of years, and look for a big game from David Pastrnak. Pastrnak was drafted in Philly, drafted literally in the city of Philadelphia, not drafted by Philly, as we all know. Had his first 2 goals of his NHL career in Philadelphia. And, I think he had his 50th or 60th goal in the year where they broke the regular season record in Philadelphia. So Pastrnak always performs against the Flyers and in Philadelphia. So I'd expect a big game out of him. So that'll do it for this show. Thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy Bruins Flyers on Saturday, and I'll be back on Monday to talk to you all. Take care.